This is the kickoff to Green Lava, and Global Lava is here to help. Today is, or actually this week, I think, is World Francophonie Day, and that is in celebration of, here's the logo right there, countries where they speak French. So I'm not even going to try. I can't speak French to save my life. So before I introduce the folks who can speak French, I will bring up a couple of notes. Please check out LAVA, the website, lava.org, and then click on the events page to check out our other upcoming events. Make sure you've subscribed. At the bottom of the homepage, you can subscribe to receive our different notifications of the events that we have coming up. We have another event through Global Lava coming up soon, which is on Israel and all the different issues of either starting a company in Israel as an American or bringing startups from Israel to America. We also have an event shortly thereafter pitching companies from Central America that will be in May. Also in April, Lava Space, which is one of our really newest communities, really exciting, will be joining the Space Tourism Conference, and Lava members get I can't remember if it's free or a discounted attendance to that conference as well. So we have a lot of exciting things. I'm really filling time as more and more people and participants enter the room here. But I will now turn over the organization of today's event to our chair of Global Lava, Gregory Farrell, and I'll also bring up Sharon Rebinder, who is our chair one of the chairs for Global Lava. So Gregory and Sharon, welcome to your show today. Thank you for putting this together, Gregory. I appreciate it. And I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Darren. Well, bonjour, everybody. We can do it maybe in French, at least for the introduction. So happy Francophonie Day. It's really a pleasure to launch again the Green Lava. Thanks to you, Darren, and thanks to you, Sharon, and of Global Lava. So we decided to make an event in coordination all together today for Francophonie Day. The last year with the pandemic has been, I think, the opportunity for all the countries to basically develop their economy around green energy, and especially a lot of governments have made some new policy and transition. A lot of companies have done as well a lot of changes in their energy transition, and some new companies have emerged, developing new technologies that would allow the planet to be much greener. So we figure out it would be a great opportunity to relaunch the Green Lava section of Lava, and it's a pleasure to launch that today. Now I'm leaving it up to Sharon for the Global Lava introduction.
Right, thank you so much. Yes, congratulations, Gregory, for launching your first Green Lava event. Global Lava was happy to support. So we chose to commemorate World Francophonie Day. And just as a reminder, French is the official language in 29 countries, which puts it in second place behind English. And then we are going to highlight some tech and investments and people from a couple of those countries, those nations. So we have the French-speaking part of Canada, we've got France, we've got islands that are part of France, and we could do many more, Belgium, Switzerland, et cetera, but today we're going to concentrate on these ones. I just have, my background gives a little bit of information about the French companies that are in California, and you'll be able to just see it when I duck out here. And then as far as Canada goes, our friends from the French government office here in Los Angeles provided information on that, and I will be posting that on the Lava website. But in the meantime, I wanted to quote that on venture capital to Canada coming from Southern California and this is now the third US market for VC after Boston, the Silicon Valley, has drastically increased over the past 3 years, with over $600 million invested into Canada before the pandemic, a 400,000 increase in comparison to 2018 levels. And then, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that France was number 3 for foreign direct investment into California by nation. So I guess I'm just going to end with that, and I will post some information on the LAVA site. Please join LAVA and check out our websites and join our events. Thanks so much. And now I will, with no further ado, I will introduce our moderator, John Rosand. You can turn your camera on, John. And as you'll see, he's got the Commotion badge of honor in the background. So I should say Jean Rosand is a founder and CEO of Commotion. And as you all probably know, the Los Angeles event Commotion is a media platform as well. And Commotion is the organizer of Commotion LA. John is also the founder and chairman of the New Cities Foundation, and he's previously been executive chairman of Publicis Live in Geneva, a former journalist as well. He held several senior editorial positions at Business Week, including Europe editor, as well as Paris, Rome, and Middle East correspondent, and has received a number of awards. And he is also an author of a book called Hop, Skip, and Go, How the Mobility Revolution Will Transform Our Lives and Our Planet from 2019. So thank you so much for joining us, John, and I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Sharon. It's really good to be here, and thanks to you and to my friends at Global Lava and Green Lava. I love the concept of green lava. It's a little bit counterintuitive to have green lava, but that's okay. Anything that's green, I instinctively like. As Sharon, you said, I'm the CEO and the founder of Commotion. We are a Los Angeles-based digital media events and consulting platform focused on emerging mobility and focused on what I like to call the mobility revolution. Of course, LA is such a great hub for that sector. It's one of the great global hubs of that sector. And I invite you all to the 5th edition of Commotion LA, November 16th to 18th. Later this year, and we're planning it as a fully in-person event. So thank you, Operation Warp Speed. Thank you, President Biden, and everybody, please go get vaccinated when you can. Mm-hmm. So it's great to be here with 3 remarkable entrepreneurs who work all in some way in the broader clean tech space, and all with ties one way or the other to the French-speaking world, if not to France itself. And it's a great moment to have this conversation, I think, because if there's one sector that is absolutely taking off, it's clean tech in all of its manifestations. I look very closely at the mobility part of that, but whether it's battery storage or sustainable aviation fuel or green hydrogen, et cetera, billions and billions are rushing into the sector worldwide. Certainly the Biden administration is almost betting the house on clean tech. And the president, as I think you're all aware, will travel to Pittsburgh in a couple days, to unveil the details, which we've all been waiting for, of the $3 trillion energy and infrastructure plan. And so sustainability and renewables are at the core of that. So without further ado, I want to introduce my fellow panelists. Elizabeth Leontieff-Ersham, if you could unmute yourself, and voila, you're the founder and CEO of Smart Oceania, which is a LA-based women-owned consulting group, which you work a lot with Pacific Islanders and Pacific Island nations. And you were born in Tahiti and grew up in Tahiti. I wish I could say that about myself, but okay. Pascal Drouin, if you could unmute yourself and show yourself, sir, is a partner, bonjour, is a partner at Cycle Capital out of Montreal. And Cycle Capital is a venture and investment firm focusing on the clean tech space, and is, I think, one of the leaders in investing in Canadian clean tech. And so we'll hear a lot about that in a couple of minutes. And finally, Alex Nessick, who's here in Los Angeles. Hi, Alex is the co-founder of Drover.ai, which is a great, very innovative startup that I know well. Alex is a serial entrepreneur in the mobility space. It's been a real honor to be his friend over these last few years. Drover AI is a AI-powered, low-cost mobile sensing solution for micro-mobility fleets like our friends at Spin and Bird, etc. You see whizzing around our cities. And LA, of course, gave birth to what has become a huge multi-billion-dollar business and is really also one of the big hubs of micro-mobility. So to kick off, let's just talk about this current climate we're in now, where we have the president of the United States about to announce a $3 billion energy infrastructure plan, very heavy on renewables. Cleantech is, has been, it's a bit of a hype cycle, but it's certainly here to stay. Maybe I'll start with you, Pascal Douant, because you're directly investing in the space. Tell us about how excited you are about, or not, about this current period and what you sort of see over the next sort of year, 2 years.
Yeah, so we're actually very excited. So we've been doing this since 2009, and it's probably, one of the most exciting times because of what you just said. So there's a general context that is currently putting a lot of focus on clean tech. There's a Biden administration with a plan that they're going to announce. Up here in Canada, we have the Trudeau administration that's been in power for a little while, and they're a lot more into the clean tech, infrastructure plays. But also, despite all the bad stuff that's been coming from COVID-19, it also acts almost as a catalyst right now, because the governments know that to restart an economy, you have to make massive investments. And now what we're hearing at every government level is, it's got to be a green restart. We gotta focus on, the green projects, green technology, invest in all these bigger projects that typically, us VCs would not think is interesting because it's too big, it's too CapEx intensive, but now you got all this government support behind it, which probably makes it interesting. And so, we're pretty excited about what's coming. And, there's also a lot of interesting liquidity from, this exciting vehicle called a SPAC. So, I mean, all of those things make it very interesting for VCs right now. So in the clean tech space, very excited.
Is there a danger? I mean, maybe danger is not the right way to put it, but the fact that the US federal government is going to be spending trillions on the sector, will Canada be able to benefit from that directly or not? Is there some anxiety about that? I mean, we have, of course, the Jones Act here in the United States, which mandates sort of US owned shipping, et cetera. So how do you, is that
yeah, so it is a factor, but it's not, those massive investments in the US in many shapes or form will trickle down to Canada in some shape or form. Our economies, you're the elephant, we're the little mice, and if you roll over, we die. But generally speaking, whatever happens in the US will definitely impact Canada. So a big chunk of investment in clean tech will inevitably lead to better business for our businesses in Canada. So we view it, very positively. We're not too scared about the policies there. There's always ways to make things work, especially when you're working on the cutting edge of technology, where often you don't have a lot of competition when you're into those micro and super niche technologies. So, it's not even a concern, to be honest.
No, interesting. Elizabeth, you work with companies, with governments. You work closely with French Polynesia and Pacific island nations. What's the buzz in that world now? What's exciting you? Are people excited also about clean tech? And I think certainly in the French Polynesia, its sustainability has been a necessary way of life for some time.
Absolutely. Clean tech, green energy, renewable, it's all about being resilient, autonomous, especially as an island. And this is the base of our tourism, as a matter of fact, to be to have a pristine and cleaner environment than everywhere else in the world. Having said that, I'm part of La French Tech Polynésie, part of the global La French Tech label, and it organizes every year international competition called Tech for Island Awards that attracts more and more new solutions by and for the islands. But what we love to say is what's good for the islands is good, therefore good for the planet. So this is in 2020, it was the second edition, and we had an amazing success with 186 applications from 37 countries, all about mostly green energy, renewable energy, blue tech, green tech, health tech, name it. So I think the islands, and of course I'm talking about the French-speaking islands, not only in French Polynesia, but the French overseas departments in the Caribbean, for example, will play a major role in providing new solutions that will impact in the long run the whole planet.
Has French Polynesia, just a question I wanted to ask you, has it benefited over this last year? I mean, if I were a high-tech entrepreneur in France faced with being locked down because of COVID and unable to go to the office, I would certainly think, hey, I'll just head to Tahiti for the next few months and work out of there. Has there been that kind of influx from the mother country, from France?
And it's part of what we call the movement of remote workers tourism.
Yeah.
Well, in this particular case, if you were able to go to Tahiti before January, you're stuck there. Because
not
the
a bad place to be stuck
closed until early May. But yes, and right now there's a reflection, a big think tank about what we can do at an international level to attract talent and hubs in French Polynesia as also a huge testing ground, because may I remind you, or maybe you do not know about that, the superficie, the area of French Polynesia is as big as Europe without Russia. So it's little land compared to oceans area, but this is a big playground and play test. So test area. So we welcome new solutions to be tested, and in a responsible way, of course.
And of course, the other, a whole big new part of the clean tech economy, entrepreneurial economy, is going to be related to oceans. And of course, French Polynesia, it's very important, vital even, and it's a big, it's a growing part of the LA economy, certainly, sort of startups related to oceans, things like that. And I think decarbonizing maritime transportation, I believe, is going to be one of the next big challenges we face here on Earth. Talking about decarbonized transportation, I wanted to talk to Alex Zesek here in LA. You're the co-founder of Drover.ai, a great little company. Tell us what's sort of keeping you up at night in a good way, Alex. And imagine this is an overall very good context for you guys and anybody in the sort of zero emission micromobility space.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly transportation really sits at the nexus of all the things we're talking about here, right? Clean tech and sustainability and emissions. And so, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm around not just EVs, but autonomous vehicles and how they could potentially be a panacea. And, Silicon Valley has a little bit of a herd mentality when it comes to cutting edge tech and these moonshots and unicorns. And so I feel like, autonomous vehicles have been kind of the shiny object. And the truth of the matter is that transportation and transportation planning, all the things that surround those types of decision making, are really, smaller changes can be more impactful than going for these kind of moonshot things. Because newsflash, whether your vehicle is autonomous, powered by diesel, powered by electricity, or unicorn tiers. It's a form factor issue, right? It's just throughput. And as you know very well, cities cannot take many more steel boxes moving through them. And so, what's really, I want to, kind of comment on the administration change that's recently occurred. It's really been refreshing to see the Secretary of Transportation, former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, really just shockingly just come out and make some of these statements that within the transportation world are kind of common knowledge, but to hear them at such a high level of the administration really signals kind of a sea change in my view, where you have a person that is riding bike share to work in DC, right? And doing so publicly. I mean, it's, where are we, the Netherlands, and it's amazing. And then he sits down for interviews and talks about infrastructure spending, which has typically been over the past 100 years, a conversation that's dominated by, hey, let's pour millions into highways and overpasses and bridges. And, it's just kind of like really big spending stuff. Whereas the infrastructure spending he's talking about has a big chunk allocated towards place building, right? Where infrastructure investments that can accommodate micromobility. And Paris has really been at the forefront of this before COVID, but also through COVID. Mayor Anne Hidalgo has really done a phenomenal job in kind of creating a space for these types of technologies to flourish. If you build it, they will come. Space was allocated for bike riding. Now you look at Rue de Rivoli and whatever. I mean, it's just like nothing but bike riders, and it's a completely different city. So I think having that messaging coming from the top is significant. Having a budget and resources allocated towards building this is significant, and it's all about investments in public transit, investments in infrastructure that can accommodate smaller vehicles powered by humans. Micromobility is a part of that, but also places to sit, right? I mean, and hearing Secretary Buttigieg talk about cities as a place for people and streets as a place for people rather than a place for vehicles to move through is I think really encouraging. And so I'm really thankful that this change has occurred, and it's really fueling optimism and growth in the space.
Yeah, no, it's a very exciting time. And I think, especially after the last 4 years, the fact that we have a really city forward administration that, to your point, Alex, thinks of, is focused on infrastructure, but not necessarily infrastructure for adding more cars and making it easier for cars. I mean, I think there's a new emphasis on digital infrastructure and what that means, and the digital right of way, and understanding the rules and the regulations and the sort of regulatory framework around digital infrastructure is super important. I'm very, very glad there's an emphasis on that. Pascal, what within the sort of clean tech space, what particularly excites you now? Is it? Yeah, I'll let you speak.
Well, that's a pretty wide topic, but yeah. So there's one very particular subject that I've been catering for a while is agriculture. It's a bit outside of the cities, and it's not necessarily a big impact on transportation, but agriculture is one of the biggest consumers and emitters of GHGs, but it's also a huge opportunity to sequester carbon, right? So it's been said that soil is the second largest carbon sink next to the ocean, which is the first one. And for years and years now, we've depleted the soil quality. And so I see a lot of opportunities in optimizing how we use land and how do we put carbon back into the soil. And so that I think is very exciting. You're seeing companies like Microsoft that are now buying, Quarks credit, which is essentially, putting back biochar into soil. There's companies like Indigo Ag that launched a huge competition tackling many of these aspects of how do you put carbon back in the soil, how do you measure the impact and make sure that the carbon is there. And so I see a lot of interesting activities there. So that's one element that I think is very interesting. More generally speaking, if I take a step back, there's also some pretty neat innovation in the semiconductor space. I know this may sound a bit, off topic, but you know, a lot of the energy that is consumed goes out as heat when you're using your power electronics. And there's a lot of very innovative products, whether it's GaN or SiC, that make that, you know, AC to DC conversion very efficient. I'm getting very down into details, but that represents about 8% of the energy we consume is wasted as heat in our power electronics. So that is another space I think is very interesting. It's out of the view, but, you know, when you think about it, and I think Alex just mentioned that it's those smaller changes that make a big difference. So.
You mentioned agriculture. Are you looking at urban agriculture, vertical farming in cities, things like that? In fact, I remember, you know, Montreal going to see, what is it called? Lufa Farms, I think.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Loved them. Went to see them.
Funny you mentioned that, because that's one of our investments, and actually sat on the board for 2 years there. So I know them pretty well. And so, yes, we are looking at that. So that is one aspect, bringing the farm closer to the city. We've looked at a number of vertical farming projects. So it is something we look at. You know, we're still looking for that, you know, special gem that's different from the others in the vertical farming space. Yeah, it is something we're looking at. How do you get food closer, more locally sourced? And, you know, taking a little bit of a step back, if you think about the whole COVID-19 impact on supply chains, you know, in where I am in Quebec, we're not sufficient, you know, self-sufficient in terms of food. And there was actually concerns at some point that we were going to get food out of California, because you guys feed us for the most part, because of the impact on the supply chain. So what was the reaction for everybody? Well, we had to produce more locally. So now we get these massive investments in greenhouses and greenhouse technologies. And this all happened within the course of a year. So it's another interesting and very active space. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Elizabeth, is you know, given French Polynesia and sort of island nations, difficult to be self-sufficient in food, is you know, high-tech agriculture something that's taking off? I imagine fish farming and aquaculture is quite big in Polynesia.
Absolutely. All of our marine resources, fishing, agriculture is a big, new, exciting projects for the youth. Before, it was considered a bit of not as glamorous as any tech word, but now we're really talking about green tech and putting forward any new technology that would allow a better utilizations of our agriculture and methods, and all this to be more autonomous and resilient. That's why we think that whatever efforts we can make in an island will tremendously impact every country. For instance, Montreal is dependent on other areas. So if we, a little island in French Polynesia, can manage to find some ways to be more resilient, that would have an impact if it's scalable. And definitely the green with the capital G that includes agriculture is in.
Interesting. I want to remind listeners, please prepare questions. We'll open this up to questions in about 15 minutes or so, and I'm sure that Alex, Pascal, and Elizabeth will be delighted to weigh in. Alex, is the kind of French connection of importance to Drover? Are you looking at sort of the micromobility players in Europe, or are you just focused now in North America?
Initially, upon launch being kind of North America based, we are servicing our primary customers in the US, though we've already had some significant conversations in progress with partners in Europe. As you well know, the infrastructure that currently exists in Europe is in a lot of ways more conducive to adoption, a rapid adoption of micromobility, being that you have denser, cities and you don't have kind of that auto-centric infrastructure that's built out. So, I think a lot of the American companies like Lime and Bird have focused a lot of their resources in the EU, and in particular France, as Paris has been the leading market for some time. London just opened up through an RFP. So we are keeping an eye on there, just mainly because the opportunity could be significantly larger than the US, at least over the long term. Now, I think it's also important to notice that really where people struggle in this space is with regulation. And anytime a new modality comes along, everybody does a lot of hand wringing and figuring out, well, how does this fit in with what exists here? And, we all forget that when cars came on the scene, they were extremely disruptive and, not exactly welcome, but they required significant investments. And so that, I think, for me, is really where we'll see this flourish, is where people and the regulatory bodies notice that investment will lead to the outcomes that they desire, and keep an open mind. And our technology is really, designed to help both sides, both the private sector and the public sector, align to help manifest the types of outcomes that they want, be it in solving the first mile, last mile problem, and making this profitable by subsidizing it, and by effectively enabling proactive compliance through AI, because artificial intelligence, where humans are terrible at following rules, AI is quite good. So I think that's really what the objective is to ensure the viability and longevity in the US as well as in EU, Southeast Asia, and we have a lot of interest across the board.
Well, explain, Alex, for the layman, how Drover technology works and what it's. So, you are not manufacturing, just so people understand, you're not manufacturing e-scooters yourself. You're not a mobility operator, but they are your clients. So yeah. What does it actually, explain what it actually does and what its capabilities are?
Good call out, because sometimes I get confused that everybody's as obsessed about this as I am. But so any dockless micromobility system, the scooters you see going around, or bike share for that matter, or moped share, is all kind of enabled by these little black boxes called IoT modules. And these little black boxes have GPS and cellular connection, among other sensors, that allow them to be tracked and managed. So when you end your ride, the next person can find it, or the operator can find it and recharge it, or maintenance it, or whatnot. And right now, GPS is not good enough in most areas, particularly urban canyons, to deliver accuracy on the order of less than half a meter, to be able to tell whether it's on a sidewalk, a street, or a bike lane. And so that leads to poor outcomes in the use of these vehicles. So users, even though there are laws on the books that exist that prevent riding on sidewalks and where pedestrians are, many of them still do. And it creates kind of an existential crisis, because scooters feel unsafe sharing the road with cars, and so they move onto the sidewalk, and it's a trickle-down effect. The pedestrians then have nowhere to go. And so again, it all boils down to having adequate infrastructure. But in the meantime, our technology is meant to help manage that scenario much better. And what Drover's IoT module does that no other can, is without using GPS or requiring GPS or cellular connection, by virtue of having a camera and AI processing on board the device, our system has contextual location awareness in the same way that a human does. So we don't require precise positioning to know where we are. Our camera is essentially looking around, and based on what we have taught the system, it knows if it's on a sidewalk, a street, or a bike lane. And in real time, our operator customers can take control of the vehicle, surface a message to the user based on the local rules and regulations. So effectively, our goal is to provide a safer and more responsible experience, and help the whole system thrive.
Right. Are you optimistic about the continued growth of the micromobility market? I was one thing we lack here in Los Angeles, unfortunately, are enough bike lanes and scooter lanes. So, one is not protected. I mean, if you're whizzing down Wilshire, God forbid, there are cars and things like that. I was lucky enough to be in Paris a few days ago on a business trip. And it's been the first time since before COVID. And I was amazed by the number of bike lanes everywhere that Mayor Hidalgo has put in. It's extraordinary. I mean, I would love to see that finally here in Los Angeles. Are you hopeful that we're going to see that in coming years?
Absolutely. I mean, again, to your earlier point, or I believe also Pascal mentioned it, that COVID kind of created this catalyst, or at the very least an opportunity for cities to take action in this regard. And Paris was one of those cities. Over 640 kilometers of new bike lanes went in as a result of COVID. And to your point, you saw it in action, and it creates a demand that is latent and that will be filled, right? That will be met. I am very optimistic because very few people know this, but before cars took over LA had a significant and expansive network of streetcars. It even had a bike highway that was raised, right? A wooden bike highway that ran from Pasadena to downtown LA, right? You can imagine that? So again, it's a matter of political will. And I think that when people realize that time they spend in their car claiming they are, sitting in traffic, they are traffic, they're wasting their life away. I think there's a kind of a shift in mentality in the way people choose to spend their time. And now remote work is also kind of, providing the opportunity to not sit in your car. And so then, opportunity presents itself in those spaces. And one last thing I'll say is that, everybody thinks that the Netherlands or Denmark were always bike-friendly countries. And the truth of the matter is that in the 70s, and you can pull up archived photos and footage of this, they actually filled in their canals and created highways, right? Multi-lane freeways running through where rivers and canals were going through in the Netherlands. And then, fast forward to the 90s, they realized it was destroying their city, the quality of life. It was segregating neighborhoods and not allowing for proper movement of people, right? And so they shifted. They dug up those freeways and flooded the canals once again. And so again, it's political will. Paris is showing that it's possible. In the US, you've had the slow streets movement, temporary streets being closed, arteries that were previously for cars being used by pedestrians. And it's bringing life to those cities again. People spend tens of thousands of dollars to go on vacation to Europe, to go experience the cafe life, right? And to sit in these streets, but plazas and experience that life, but they won't allow for it. It's this NIMBY, attitude. They won't allow for it in the US. So I think we just have to help move that ball down the field.
Won't be easy. I mean, my worry's always been that we're going to regard, cars as many people regard sort of Second Amendment rights to, carry guns. And, but, it's a good fight, and we have to do it. Elizabeth, any thoughts about that? About cars and
I wish we could also reclaim some more space in the islands there is a definite effort toward it, but moving roads, it's a big thing. It's a political, it has to be put on a political agenda. Right. And for sure we have the same issues at a smaller level. But again, I'm very hopeful that with the new generations and the new solutions and what is the good side of what COVID brings us is to think in another way with the well-being on our mind and the good of all. So I think we have the same issues everywhere.
Right. Pascal, I want to change the subject just a little bit before we open it up to some questions. One of my particular passions when it comes to mobility is hydrogen fuel cells and hydrogen. Yep. Quebec, of course, is massive producer of hydroelectricity, which is probably the greenest kind of electricity you can have. And there's some enormous now green hydrogen projects in Quebec. Yep. And do you see the development of, are there enough sort of interesting startups now in the broad hydrogen space that do they excite you? Do you see that developing as a sector?
It's a sector that we're actively looking at. So the challenge with hydrogen is cost right now, right? So even the best performing electrolyzer is still 5 times more expensive than your petroleum source. But we are looking at how can we reduce the cost of generating hydrogen and the technology. So whether it's membranes or more more on the technology side. So we do see some exciting hydrogen plays out there with applications today. The main challenge and the main obstacle right now is how do you get that to a massive market? Because today there's a lot of potential, there's a lot of demand, but really every new hydrogen product that comes out there is faced with the same issue: is how do I get my hydrogen? And on the other side, you've got the big players that you want to sell to, and let's say you're a membrane guy. You send the products, or the end products are not mass distributed right now. So it's a bit of a challenge for the hydrogen space today, but it is something that we're keeping our fingers on, because we do see a lot and massive potential for it. Specifically in those heavy transport applications, whether it's long haul trucks or even planes at some point, because the energy density right now for batteries is not there. We're not seeing anything for a couple decades in that space that there's going to be enough energy density to replace those. And so we do see a very interesting play there. And so we're trying to figure out exactly where we want to play. As a venture capitalist, often we build our thesis, and then there's 2 ways we do investments. Someone comes to see us, they pitch to us, and we buy into their thesis, or we build our own thesis and we go out looking for companies. And right now for hydrogen, that's what we're doing. We haven't seen anything that excites us right now, but we're building our thesis, figuring out what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, what's the most efficient way to do it, and what's the end application. And once we find the company that we think is a winner in that space, we're likely to invest in them. So.
Right. Of course, one other space in the sort of renewable area is offshore wind, which is, I suspect, will be quite big on both seaboards in Canada. Again, President Biden just announced a major push in this area. I think within 15 years, I think New York will be powered largely by vast wind turbines, off the horizon in the Atlantic, on the shelf, the coastal shelf. I suspect that will be same with Montreal, Toronto, the big urban centers of Canada.
Yeah, what's interesting is wind is making a comeback. So, in Quebec and in Ontario, you've got these massive utilities. So in Quebec, it's Hydro-Quebec. They're the only one supplying electricity in the whole province. It's a monopoly. It's owned by the government. So they in the past invested in wind technology, but as you mentioned, we've got those huge hydro dams that are fully amortized, and we're producing electricity at 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's not like you're putting a wind turbine that's producing at 17 cents. Doesn't really make much sense. But now that the prices have come down significantly, and the demand for energy is always on the rise, we're getting to that point where we used to have 120% capacity at peak. So we were always massively, oversupplied in electricity. Now we're getting close to the point where we might need to buy some from New York State at some point. And so we're deploying wind. Well, very specific cases in January when it's minus 35, but that's another story. But so there are some new wind projects that are being developed right now, massive wind projects in the gigawatt range. And so that's also a very interesting development right now. Yeah.
Interesting. I want to maybe just sort of wind down very, very gently and bring the conversation back to Los Angeles and the SoCal region. This is, after all, Global Lava and Green Lava, the LA Venture Association. So Elizabeth and Alex, you're both based here. Tell us about, in your own experience, how the LA region has been developing as more and more of a hub for clean tech, for entrepreneurialism, for startups, et cetera. I mean, it seems in the 5 years that we've been here, it's certainly becoming an ever more dynamic sort of venture hub. But just maybe would love to hear your thoughts about that, Alex, and then Elizabeth.
Yeah, as you've seen, I think both you and I, we originally met at the LA Clean Tech Incubator. I think that's kind of a flagship organization that really embodies the cooperation of the private sector, subsidized by publicly owned utility and the mayor's office being involved. So I think it's definitely the desire is there, and it lays the foundation for just really great innovation in the clean tech space, be it energy, mobility, et cetera. So I think, obviously VCs have taken notice, and you have the incumbents, upfronts and whatnot that are down here in LA and Silicon Beach. But for me, the kind of ecosystem, Southern California is so big. It offers many challenges, and in a way, it's a collection of small towns and cities. And so the challenges here are similar to solving challenges in a broader regional sense, but all while being in a single city. So from a transportation point of view, a grid power point of view, I mean, just LA County in general is massive and more populated than over 40 states collectively in the United States. So that presents a huge opportunity from a problem set, but also from a resource standpoint, with talent, phenomenal universities and workforce. What's not to like about living in SoCal, right? So I think that it just creates a really cutting edge environment, both for the people that are looking to solve problems and to be able to pilot things. I think there's just a thirst and a hunger for innovation, where maybe slightly less than San Francisco. I think San Francisco may have gotten itself into a little bit of a reluctance, I guess, to try things as much. And I think LA has filled that void, at least from what I've seen, to be more willing to lead the charge in some more innovative areas. I mean, there's a no emissions delivery zone in Santa Monica right now that's being piloted, and I think that's really fantastic. Things like that. So.
Elizabeth, tell us your perspective on Los Angeles and the venture scene.
My perspective would be, more from a foreigner startup that wants to grow within the American and especially Californian ecosystem, whether they come from Paris, Europe, or French Polynesia, because LA is our first stop to the US, unless you want to go to Hawaii. And there is definitely this legitimate attraction to the ecosystem in LA because it's more approachable, more daring. They have to decide between LA and the Silicon Valley. And if they're not as bold or as confident, they would prefer the LA hub rather than San Francisco or the Silicon Valley. I think there is a great potential to building a bridge between California and other parts of the world. And of course, I'm promoting French Polynesia, just because it's a logical geographical link.
Yeah, absolutely. Darren, hi.
Hey.
Do you have some questions from the audience?
There are some questions from the audience, and then I have some of my own, which is why I popped up a little earlier. What you guys may not know is I actually was I was Gregory a number of years ago. I was the chair of Green Lava for some years while I was running a company that we made biofuel. So we converted food waste into biofuel, and that'll be kicking back off. But there's a question for Pascal. Apologies if someone missed this earlier, but what is the typical check size that you cut, and what stage do you invest in?
So we're typically going to look at Series B. We sometimes cheat and do, what we call the Series A plus. So it's a bit of an earlier stage company, but has, with let's just say a very exciting potential. So initially we'll do about $5 million. on the low end, we'll do 2.5. On the high end, we'll do maybe 7.5. And we typically budget about 15 million for the lifetime of the investment. We can go as high as 20. So.
Interesting. So I'm going to do a follow-on and then bring Elizabeth into this question of with Island. You mentioned earlier that you will either take pitches and hear a founder's thesis, or you approach things. Do you have a thesis pretty much for almost every area in sustainability, or what are your primary areas that you really develop thesis around?
So the primary areas is green chemicals. So anything that's got to do to waste chemicals. So replacing petroleum products, we've got a pretty solid thesis around that. Battery or energy storage at grid scale. We have a pretty solid thesis around that. We're building the one on hydrogen. And those would be, I would say, the ones where we really developed those theses and went out, looked for companies and found something. On the battery storage, funny enough, it's energy storage systems that is based out of Portland, Oregon. So that's one of the very interesting companies we found. So we don't have a specific thesis developed for every sustainability subsector, because that would be a humongous task. But we do follow a little bit. The other one we're developing on is the agriculture, as I mentioned before. Very interesting. How do you use better practices in the soil as carbon sinks, and how do you monetize that? So we're seeing traction, but we're still building. Where do we want to play? Do we want to be the guys that produce stuff that you put in the soil, or do we want to be the guys that measure accurately what's in the soil and to efficiently see what carbon has been down there? So we do work. Most of our companies sell their theses, and we buy into those. But every once in a while, when there's too much activity, the hydrogen space is one of them, where we're seeing different pitches and completely opposite theses. Then we say, all right, it's an interesting space, but let's make up our mind before we make an investment.
So do you have a thesis, and this is where I'm going to bring Elizabeth back in here. Obviously, island communities present particularly limited problems with limited ability to have certain resources, right? There's constraints, I guess, around island communities. Do you have any approach towards those types of technologies? And I'd throw it as Elizabeth. Do you have any particular technologies you'd love to hear him talk about or to give an opinion on?
So we haven't developed any specific thesis around islands, but we do have, they often served as beachhead markets. Right. So, for example, we had a waste management system, next generation incinerators. Islands are obviously using that a lot more than you would, let's say, New York State. Street lighting, for example, to go back 10 years, LEDs were not necessarily being deployed everywhere in North America, but every island nation was using them because energy savings were important to them. And so if you look today, most of the Crees of this world, you'll see in their history, they probably have sold a lot of lights in island nations before they sold them in the continental US. And in fact, one of our companies has almost zero business in the US, but they're selling everywhere, like whether it's the Caribbean, French Polynesia, Puerto Rico, and they're an LED street lighting company. So that's the kind of, often they're early adopters for these types of technologies out of necessity, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I would say that anything that has to do with living remotely, access to health care, access to clean water, and not too expensive energy, electricity. That's a major issue, and that's what we're looking for, along with anything that has to do with smart tourism. As a matter of fact, I would like to highlight one of the laureates of last year's overseas territory categories. It comes from, it's a startup coming from Guadeloupe, the Caribbean. The name is SMO Solar Process, and their solution is about a compact autonomous processor that uses solar energy as a main power sources, and it turns waste and non-food biomass into green hydrogen energy. And all this with negative carbon footprint. They already have a prototype that works perfectly well in Morocco, and now they're, as a matter of fact, looking at California to expand their business and grow. So yeah, Pascal, we should talk.
I'm surprised we haven't. But yeah, let's connect for sure. I'm sure we have some interesting, yeah.
Well, that's you mentioned earlier. You mentioned earlier, John. I mean, that's one of the roles of Lava is to try to foster communities and these types of programs where we can connect everyone. I know we have 2 more minutes, but there is another question from the audience that popped up, which I'll read. As a founder, I'm lean and like to move fast. Dealing with the government is painful, being that many of the big opportunities in green are often led by policy, like the Paris mayor. What's the best way to work with government and not get frustrated beyond the point where French or Francophonic wine can't help ease the frustration and anguish? Great question. I love the way it was written, whoever wrote that. It's happy hour, so cheers, and whoever wants to answer that question.
Well, just let me open a bottle of Beaujolais first.
Okay.
I'll answer briefly. I think from my perspective, I agree. As founders, it's frustrating to deal B2G. Governments do move a lot slower, but I think really the focus should be to de-risk anything for the governments, right? No government, they see startups come and go. They don't know if you're going to be around in 6 months. And so I think, having a partnership or coming up with like a really compelling case where even if your startup fails, whatever is left behind is still going to yield results or push the ball down the road. They have to think in far larger cycles than we do as startups, especially getting off the ground. So they have to account for things 30 years down the road. So de-risking things is really primarily the focus, and finding a bigger customer maybe that has a pre-existing relationship that is willing to pilot it under an agreement or something like that is one option.
And also, I wanted to just jump in and say that sometimes Paris isn't the end all. You could go to a smaller city in Provence, like Grenoble, for example. My day job is promoting Grenoble, or the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region, for example. There we go.
Yeah, you learn the art of lobbying.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say is, sometimes you need a good lobbyist with good connections within the government just to make sure that you're actually talking to the right people. And you can't replace that.
Yeah.
I'll throw a plug out there for one of our Lava communities, which is Lava Gov. And the reason why we did form that is for 3 different reasons. One, there is technology called GovTech, but more importantly, we have folks on that committee who are paying attention to the legislature and to how regulations are being pushed down. So certainly to whoever that founder is, reach out to the Lava Gov committee and maybe see if there's someone there that is working on your issue or has some large deep pocket player that is in line with what you're trying to accomplish.
Yep, and I would also add, get involved in those, public town halls and those, when they put round tables on the subject that matters to your company, you have to be involved.
Or if you can embarrass the local politician for not taking your position, that's even better, right?
Yeah.
Gregory, we welcome you back. We weren't sure if we were going to get you back. Thank you again for putting this, getting Green Lava back on track. I really appreciate this.
My pleasure. It's really an honor to do that. I think it's going to be a very interesting year on Green Lava. A lot of topics to cover.
Indeed. John, do you want to round the horn with any final words?
I just want to thank Pascal, Elizabeth, Alex, Sharon, Gregory, and of course you, Darren. Kudos to Green Lava and Global Lava and Lava in general for just hosting this. Great discussion. I look forward to the next one.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you out there in the audience. I noticed we only lost 2 people at the top of the hour. So I think that means that you cared about what these speakers were saying. Once again, I will remind everyone in the audience, if you know of companies that are closing rounds of funding, I'd like to know about it for our new column called Recent Raises. And we'd also like to bring them into our syndication series events where we bring investors who may or may not have managed to invest in it, but are in that space, engaged together to learn a little bit more about them and provide support for those entrepreneurs in the local community to grow that ecosystem. So especially with green, if you know of you have a company in your portfolio that has just closed its round of funding, please send that to me, darren@lava.org. Any final words, Gregory or Sharon or anybody? Does anyone else have a final word before we go on it?
Merci à tous.
It had to be French, please. I'm gonna we'll let Sharon sign off in French.
Oh, je l'ai dit, je l'ai fait. No, sérieusement, thank you so much, everybody.
Okay.
Bonsoir.
Take care. Au revoir.
Bonsoir, merci.
Bonsoir.
Bye-bye.